Let's start. In 1715, the most powerful empire in Europe was effectively bankrupt. But within 5 years, a convicted murderer on the run would convince the entire country to hand over their gold in exchange for pieces of paper. And in the process, he would invent the modern stock market, create the world's first millionaires, and then accidentally destroy the entire economy. This is the story of the Mississippi Bubble. France had a massive problem. King Louis XIV had just died, leaving behind a legacy of absolute power, the Palace of Versailles, and a mountain of debt so high that the country was spending 80% of its tax revenue just paying the interest. The new regent of France, Philippe II, the Duke of Orleans, was desperate. He needed a miracle. What he got instead was a tall, charismatic Scottish gambler named John Law. Law was not a typical banker. He was a mathematical genius who had figured out how to calculate odds in card games, making him a fortune in the underground casinos of London. But he was also a fugitive. Years earlier, Law had killed a man in a duel over a woman. He was sentenced to hang, but he managed to escape prison and fled to mainland Europe, drifting from city to city, gambling and studying economics. John Law had a radical theory. He believed that money did not need to be gold or silver. He believed that money was simply a tool to facilitate trade. If a government could just print paper money and declare it valuable, trade would explode and the economy would grow. In 1715, John Law arrived in Paris. He walked into the royal court wearing a sharp, elegant coat and made Philippe II an offer he couldn't refuse. Law promised to erase the national debt, stimulate the economy, and make France the wealthiest nation on earth, and he was going to do it with nothing but ink and paper. Philippe the Souk gave Law permission to establish the Banque Générale, the first central bank in French history. Here was the pitch. People could deposit their heavy, cumbersome gold and silver coins into the bank. In exchange, the bank would give them paper notes. These notes were guaranteed by the king and could be traded for goods or used to pay taxes. At first, the French people were deeply suspicious. For thousands of years, wealth meant physical metal you could hold in your hand. Handing it over for a flimsy piece of paper felt like madness. But Law was a master psychologist. He ensured the bank always honored its paper notes. If someone wanted their gold back, they got it immediately. Over the next few years, the convenience of paper money won them over. Trade increased. The economy started to breathe again, but John Law wasn't finished. The paper money was just stage one of his master plan. To truly erase the national debt, he needed something bigger. He needed a story. He needed a dream that the French public could buy into. Enter the Mississippi Company. France owned a massive, largely unexplored territory in North America called Louisiana. Law convinced the regent to give his new company a total monopoly on all trade with this new world. Law launched a brilliant marketing campaign. He printed pamphlets describing Louisiana as a paradise. He told tales of mountains made of solid emeralds, rivers overflowing with gold, and friendly locals eager to trade precious gems for simple European trinkets. It was a complete fabrication. Louisiana was mostly a humid, mosquito-infested swamp. But in the 1700s, there was no internet to verify these claims. The public only knew what John Law told them, and John Law was telling them they were about to get unimaginably rich. Law announced that anyone could buy shares in the Mississippi Company, but he added a genius twist. You could buy these shares using the government's massive debt bonds. Suddenly, the worthless government debt that people had been stuck with for years was transformed into a golden ticket. People rushed to trade their bonds for shares. The initial share price was set at 500 livres. Within weeks, as the stories of American gold spread, the price doubled. Then it tripled. A frenzy gripped Paris. People from all over Europe flooded into the city just to buy shares. The street where the stock was traded, the Rue Quincampoix, became completely impassable. Noblemen, peasants, priests, and servants were all shoulder to shoulder, desperately trying to buy a piece of the American dream. To keep the momentum going, Law used his central bank to print massive amounts of new paper money, so people could borrow cash to buy more shares. The money supply exploded. By late 1719, the share price hit 10,000 livres. It was a 20-fold increase in less than a year. This was the moment when the word millionaire was literally invented. Ordinary people who had bought shares early suddenly found themselves with paper fortunes worth millions. Waiters were buying mansions. Chimney sweeps were hiring their own servants. It was a mass hallucination of infinite wealth, but there was a fatal flaw in the system. All of this wealth existed entirely on paper. The share prices were based on the promise of gold from Louisiana, but no gold was actually coming back. The entire national economy was now balanced on a foundation of printed banknotes and exaggerated stories. The darkest moment arrived in early 1720. A few of the smartest, wealthiest investors, the so-called realizers, looked around and noticed that bread and meat prices were skyrocketing because of all the new paper money in circulation. They realized the game was ending. Quietly, They began selling their shares. They took their stacks of paper money to the bank and demanded to exchange it back for physical gold and silver. They packed the gold into carts and secretly smuggled it out of the country. When the general public realized what was happening, panic set in. Everyone rushed to the bank to trade their paper notes for metal. But John Law had printed far more paper money than there was gold in the vault. It was a classic bank run. Desperate to stop the collapse, John Law convinced the regent to take extreme measures. He made it illegal for any citizen to own more than a small amount of gold. He ordered the police to search homes and seize physical treasure. He tried to force the public to use his paper money by law, but you cannot legislate trust. Once the belief in the paper was gone, it was just paper. The share price of the Mississippi Company plummeted from 10,000 livres back down to 500. The paper money became entirely worthless. The very same people who had become millionaires on paper just months earlier were now completely ruined. Germain Boffrand, one of the most famous and successful architects in France, had invested heavily in the scheme. Within weeks, his entire life savings evaporated, leaving him financially devastated. He was just one of thousands. Life savings disappeared. Riots broke out in the streets. The French economy crashed harder than it had before John Law ever arrived. John Law, the man who had briefly been the most powerful and celebrated genius in Europe, was forced to flee the country in disguise. He spent the rest of his life wandering Europe, gambling to survive, and died impoverished in Venice 9 years later. Fast forward back to today. We look at the Mississippi bubble and laugh at the foolishness of people buying into a swamp based on fake news. 1,000% because of a post on a message board, or a new cryptocurrency token reaches $1 billion valuation despite having no actual product. We are playing John Law's game. You're buying a story. John Law wasn't wrong that paper money could work. Today, the entire global economy runs on fiat currency. If you're enjoying our deep dives into the financial crises that shaped civilization, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Money is not math. Money is psychology. It is a shared delusion. And as the French public learned in 1720, and as we continue to learn in every financial bubble since, that delusion is incredibly fragile. The wealth exists on a screen or on a piece of paper, right up until the exact moment someone asks to see the gold. And when the gold isn't there, the story ends.